Before beginning the afternoon cross-examination, Tim Nelson, you see the tribunal before you. I hope you all have copies of the scenario, and I hope also that you've had an opportunity to study it because it'll be easier to follow what's going on. I think we'll let the chairman of the tribunal, Ms. Heilbron, commence the proceedings.
Mr. Shepherd, before the adjournment, you were going to consider whether you had any further direct examination. Do you have any?
I do not. Thank you very much. I wonder, just a point of privilege, I see that opposing counsel is hogging the water glass. I wonder if my client might have some water.
Of course.
Madam Chair.
Here's a clean glass.
Ms. Montero, as you now know, Mr. Nelson's now going to ask you some questions.
Ms. Montero, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can I ask a question? You have your able counsel, Mr. Shepherd, with you. There's been another gentleman accompanying you and who is present today. Could you identify that gentleman, please?
If I may, Madam Chairman, may I object to the question? It has nothing to do with the merits of the case. Probably reflects the desperation of counsel on the merits of his case, and I think I know where he's going, you know where he's going, and I would object to the question on the grounds that it's both impertinent and irrelevant.
I just asked the tribunal if I could establish for the record, this being a private proceeding, who the gentleman who's been accompanying the witness to these proceedings is. If he's not a member of the legal team, we have a fair interest in knowing.
Well, perhaps before we determine this, can you just tell us to what issue this question's going?
I'm happy to answer the question, Madam Chairman. You're referring to my gondolier, Guido.
Is he a legal advisor?
Guido is my bodyguard. As you know, there are criminal proceedings threatened against me, and my safety is in danger. And Mr. Nelson, I understand you're a member of the International Arbitration Bar, and my understanding is that it is not unheard of to have arm candy accompanying you at your conferences, so this is exactly the same.
Thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome.
You're a citizen of Juristania, is that correct?
Yes.
And you've been Chief Executive Officer of Montero Corporation since approximately 1995, is that correct?
Yes.
And you've been in control of Montero Company, therefore, for about 20 years, is that right?
Yes. If your maths are correct, that's right.
And except for your years receiving education abroad, you've been resident in Juristania until recently, all of your life, right?
Yes.
And you received a Bachelor of Arts from, I think the record states, a Canadian university in the early 1990s, right?
I received a degree in Southern Hemisphere Studies from McGill University in Canada.
That well-known bastion of learning on Southern Hemisphere studies.
Correct.
Okay. And you also received a law degree from Juristania National University in the mid-1990s as well, right?
As well as an LLM from Harvard Law School.
And
well-known bastion of legal learning.
Could you repeat the last part? I just didn't hear it properly.
That well-known bastion of legal learning.
So they say. You've also been admitted as a member of the Juristanian Bar for about 20 years, right?
Yes.
So you're a lawyer by training, right?
By training, I am.
Okay. And Montero Corporation has itself operated within Juristania for approximately 50 years. That's true, right?
I believe that's correct.
It was founded by your father and historically was an importer and distributor of goods into Juristania, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Could I ask the tribunal if the witness could be instructed not to confer with her counsel before she answers questions?
Mr. Shepherd, you want to say something because it's not normal for a witness to consult with counsel during cross-examination.
Well, but as a
Microphone.
well-known lawyer had said in
Microphone.
the Senate hearing, I am not a potted plant, and there may be issues, for example, of the attorney-client privilege that might be broached by a question, and I would respect, we'll certainly not abuse this, Madam Chairman, but I do believe that counsel have a function and that she would have a right to inquire, for example, about a question of a privileged matter. In this case, there was not such an issue, and she's been advised to answer the question. But I would respectfully, I would respectfully submit that she does have the opportunity to consult with me on matters, and if you think we abuse it, we'll of course abide your instruction.
Well, I think the way to deal with this is your client is in fact a lawyer herself. So if there is a possible question of privilege, if we can pause and then we can consider whether or not you make an objection on her behalf.
Thank you.
Yes. Your father was experienced in dealing with the Juristanian government, wasn't he?
What do you mean by experienced?
He had expertise in dealing with the Juristanian government, didn't he?
He certainly had experience in doing so. He cultivated over many years his contacts at the government, yes.
And those contacts, as you call them, were helpful in negotiating contracts with the government, weren't they?
As always, in any negotiations, it's helpful to have a good relationship with whomever might be able to negotiate with you, yes.
And indeed they were helpful, right?
My understanding was that they were helpful, yes.
And those contacts also were helpful in dealing with local trade laws concerning importation of goods, weren't they?
That's my understanding as well.
And running an importation business requires that you, as chief executive officer, know about Juristanian trade laws, correct?
I have a general understanding of them, yes. I do employ legal counsel to advise me on the detail of them.
So as a chief executive officer, you gather around the best information you can get from whatever advisors are available to you, and you insist that those advisors give you the best advice you can get, right?
I have counsel that provide me with the best advice that I can afford, and I hope that that advice is useful, yes.
Okay. Juristania, by the way, is landlocked, right?
It is.
Okay. And just as a small point of detail, you were your father's only child, right?
That I know of, yes.
Yes. And you own the business 100%, right? Okay. No one else is in charge. The buck stops with you, right?
I should hope so.
Okay. And you became CEO of Montero Company immediately upon his death, right?
Yes.
And so you have since then had access to his contacts within the government, right?
As well as previously I had knowledge of them because they knew my father, yes. But
Okay,
obviously I was younger and he was in charge and they dealt with him. Now they deal with me.
And you've built on that expertise over 20 years as CEO, right?
Yes.
Okay. You've spoken out against corruption of government officials within Juristania, haven't you?
I'm not sure that I would qualify what I said about corruption as speaking up. I did write about the situation in Juristania, which is also a situation that prevails elsewhere, yes.
And your article was critical of corruption, was it not?
Not so much critical as stating that it is a matter of fact. It is the way that things are done. I may prefer for it to be differently, but that is not the situation right now, or was not historically.
You would prefer it to be differently. Is that your testimony?
I certainly am not in favor of corruption as a matter of principle.
Okay. And you stand on your principles and you're doing business, right?
I stand on my principles on doing business, but I have commercial imperatives as well.
Okay. Your contacts are particularly strong with the Derecho party, right?
The Recho party, yes.
I'm sorry. You have a lot of friends in that party, that's true, right?
These are people who knew my father and respected him, and so therefore I have benefited from his legacy, yes.
Yes. But today you have, or at least until it's, withdraw that. It's true that the party was voted out of office on November the 6th, 2002, right?
If it is in my statement, it's true, yes.
Okay. I think it's a stipulated fact, so I'll move on. Montero Company has since 2005 been a 50% joint venture partner in Fremont, true?
That's correct.
Okay. And Montero is in joint venture together with my client Framingham, true?
You would know that, yes.
Yes. And Montero, before forming this joint venture, had worked with Framingham on several projects before, true?
Yes.
So, if we took matters as they stood at 2005, at that point you'd known the CEO of Framingham, Mr. Bettoni, for 10 years, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you personally took part in negotiating the 2005 contract between Fremont, the joint venture company, and the government, is that true?
Correct.
And as CEO, you also took part directly in negotiating the joint venture contract between Montero and Framingham, true?
Yes.
Okay. So under the joint venture, Framingham supplied the skills and capabilities needed to build the Taishoko project, that's true, right?
Say again, sorry.
Framingham, under the joint venture, was responsible for supplying the skills and capabilities needed to build the Taishoko project, right?
Correct.
So they had to physically attend to the construction of the road that led out from the mine, for instance, right?
My understanding was that that was not Horace himself. He had several deputies who were on the ground. I was not on the ground myself either.
If I could ask you to listen carefully to my question, because my question was directed to Framingham. Framingham's role was the physical build-out of the road, right?
Yes.
And the physical development of the mine, right?
Yes.
And the construction of the power plant, right?
Yes.
And the lines that went to Jura City, right?
The lines that went out of Juristina and into the next country, yes.
And Montero had responsibility for strategic planning, right?
Yes, that's me.
And Montero also had responsibility for government relations in connection with the project, right?
Correct.
Now, from 2005 onwards, Fremont was a jointly managed company, right?
Yes.
You were on Fremont's board, right?
In rotation with a Framingham person.
I'm sorry, the board of directors of Fremont included you from 2005 onwards, right?
Yes.
Okay. What you were referring to just then was the rotating CEO of Fremont, right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. But the board at all times has included Montero representatives and framing representatives, right?
That's correct.
And the board's job, as with any corporate board, was to oversee the operations of the company, right?
difficult to disagree with that.
Okay. And so the board's job was to approve all major decisions involving Fremont, right?
Yes,
And that included entry into significant contracts, right?
yes,
You'd say finance arrangements are a significant contract, right?
correct.
Okay. One of your particular roles at board level was to advise the board members on strategic planning, wasn't it?
Was to advise whom on strategic planning?
The board as a whole on strategic planning, right?
Yes,
And at board meetings, you received reports from management on the operations of the company Fremont, right?
yes,
And those board meetings occurred at least quarterly, right?
at least quarterly, yes.
And did you attend in person?
I attended in person almost all of the time, and if I was not in person, I was via telephone conference.
And did you receive board written materials before those meetings?
Yes,
And did you review them before the board meetings?
yes,
And you would agree that financing is an important aspect in strategic planning, right?
Asked and answered. Asked and answered objection. For the asked and
I'll
answered.
withdraw the question. Now, under the joint venture agreement, the position of CEO rotated every 2 years, correct?
that's correct.
So between January 2005, when Fremont was formed, and January 2007, 2 years later, the CEO of Fremont was a Framingham appointee, correct?
Yes,
And between January 2007 and January 2009, the CEO of Fremont was chosen by Montero Company, right?
yes.
Meaning you chose that person, right?
I had a say, yes.
Well, the buck stops with you. You chose that person, right?
Yes,
Okay. Who was that executive?
that executive, you mean a name or a
Yes,
position?
the name.
The name, the name was Guido Montero.
It
My
wasn't the
cousin.
same gentleman as has been assisting you this week.
No,
No.
it's somebody else.
This was a highly qualified executive, right?
Highly qualified for what exactly?
The job of CEO of Fremont, for which you handpicked him.
Absolutely, otherwise I would not have picked him.
The last rotation of the CEO was between January 2009, the last rotation for Framingham was between January 2009 and January 2011, right?
From 2009 and 2011, and yes, that was Framingham.
And then there was a Montero person from January 2011 onwards, right?
I don't know January, but certainly from the time that the Framingham person stepped down, yes.
Well,
I
it was
don't recall specifically January.
Well, it was early 2011, right?
I don't recall.
Well, it's a 2-year rotation, and your company was
Yes,
formed.
but I can't tell you the exact month.
But you'd agree, given that the anniversary of the forming of the company was early 2005, that your hand-picked representative assumed office at Fremont in early 2011, right?
That would be logical, but I can't confirm.
And who was that person?
The Framingham person?
No, your
Oh,
Fremont.
my last
Yes.
person. My last person was a lady called Daisy Chaplin. Highly qualified as well.
When Guido Montero was CEO of Fremont, he was on site at the Teishoko project, right?
Yes, he was.
And when Daisy, what was the
Chapman.
second name again? Chapman. She also was on site at the Teishoko project, right?
I don't know that she was there on a daily basis, but she was there, yes.
She was overseeing its operations as a chief executive, right?
Yes, she was.
And both of these people reported to you, didn't they?
Yes.
Now, the concession contract between Fremont and the government is governed by Juristanian law, true?
That's what I understand, yes.
The concession envisaged that there would be sales of coal to the electricity company in Juris City, true?
Yes.
It's also a fact that by its terms, the agreement contained no express prohibition on export sales of coal produced by the mine, right?
Madam Chairman, the objection is that calls for a legal conclusion. You have the contract and evidence. The tribunal can conclude it. Although our witness has law training, there's no indication that she is a practicing lawyer or an expert on legal matters. So we object on the ground that the question calls for a legal conclusion.
May I be heard on that, Madam Chair? The witness has testified in her witness statement on this very issue. She's opened the door to it in a... Yes, I will be taking the witness in my next question to paragraph 10 of her witness statement.
Hilary, put on your microphone.
Thank you.
And I draw the tribunal's attention to the second sentence and third sentence in her witness statement. I submit that she has squarely put in issue the terms and effect of the agreement.
Proceed, Mr.
Okay. Have you got your witness statement in front of you, and could you turn to paragraph 10, please, Ms. Montero? It's your testimony in paragraph 10, first that you participated in the negotiation of the contract between the joint venture company Fremont and the Juristanian government, and you've already testified today about that. I want to ask you about the second and third paragraphs. As can be seen from reading section 4 of the contract with the government, there was no restriction on the sale of coal to buyers of coal apart from the power plant. And you go on to say the contract says Fremont is hereby granted all rights to mine and use coal in the coal mining area in Taishoko province, delineated in answer 5 hereto, over the term of the contract. So my question is, by its terms, the agreement contained no express prohibition on export sales of coal produced by the mine, right?
The contract says what it says.
And you understand it as meaning, don't you, that it contained no express prohibition on export sales of coal produced by the mine, right?
That was my understanding.
That is your understanding today, right?
Yes.
And that's always been your understanding of the contract, right?
Yes.
Okay. And since you consider that the concession which contains no such restriction, withdraw that, it follows from your stated position that there is no provision requiring that sales be exclusively to the electricity company, right?
Walk me through that again, please.
It follows from what you've just agreed is the true meaning of this concession that there is no requirement that sales be exclusively to the electricity company, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, the board carefully considered whether to enter into the concession contract with the government, right?
Yes.
It voted to approve the execution of that agreement, right?
Yes.
And it did execute that agreement, right?
Yes.
So the board deliberated on the matter, right?
Yes.
And you expressed your support for entering into the agreement, right?
Of course.
And you answered any questions that board members may have as to your views on whether to execute the agreement, right?
Yes.
And at that time, it's true that you expressed your view that the coal mine owned by Fremont, once operational, would not be bound to sell exclusively to the electricity company, right?
I don't recall that the matter came up at the time.
You don't recall discussion of the matter at all?
Not at that time, no. This has come up recently.
I want to ask, when you say you don't recall, you're not saying it wasn't discussed, you're saying you don't remember what was discussed, right?
I don't remember that the matter was discussed at all.
Again, my question is, you're not saying it was never discussed, you're simply saying you don't remember, right?
It was not discussed in front of me. It may have been discussed elsewhere. in which case I would not have known about it.
The fact is it was discussed in your presence and you expressed the view that there was no obligation of exclusivity to the electricity company, right?
Not in those days. I never said, we didn't talk about it.
You're in charge of strategic planning, right?
Yes.
And this is a critical part of the strategic planning of the company, right? This contract, right?
The contract, yes.
You also expressed your view that the company would be free to engage in exports of coal not needed for power production, right?
I don't recall that this matter was raised at the time.
In fact, it was, right?
I just said I don't recall that it was.
And you expressed the view that nothing in the concession agreement prohibited exports of coal produced by the coal mine, right?
I did not.
That's third time to the well, asked and answered and answered. Objection.
It's a different question, Madam Chair. I was asking about
Perhaps
exports.
you could rephrase it so that the community...
You expressed the view that there was no contractual prohibition on export of coal from the mine. True?
What timing are you talking about?
January 2005.
No, I did not. Not in those days. This was not raised before me, and I was not asked to express a view on that in those days.
Fremont received finance to conduct the Taishoko project, didn't it?
Yes.
As a board member, you approved the terms of that financing, right?
Yes.
You knew as a board member that Fremont's cash flow would generate the necessary revenue. Sorry, withdraw that. You knew as a board member that Fremont's cash flow would be needed to service its loans. True?
Yes.
Its cash flow, in fact, was the sole means of repaying its creditors, right?
Where do you get that in the statement?
I'm asking you as a board member. You knew that there was no other source of repaying its loans other than the cash that it was able to produce.
That's correct.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So you knew, as the person responsible for strategic planning, it was important to ensure there would be no regulatory problems that would prevent Fremont from getting the needed cash flow, right?
That would be, yes, ideal.
As a board member, you were also kept up to date on the state of major construction works, right?
Yes.
You were kept up to date and made aware when the power plant was complete, right?
Yes.
And when the power lines were constructed, right?
Yes.
And when the roads connecting Taishoko with the sea and port facilities in another country were completed, right?
Yes.
And just so the record is clear, what is the neighboring country?
Laurania.
Could you spell that?
Laurania.
Okay. You'd agree as a board member that anyone operating a mine needs to get current and up-to-date data on the composition of reserves in that mine, right?
Yes.
And that's true whether it's a gold, silver, platinum or coal mine, right?
I don't know that. Certainly for coal, that's the case.
So you've learnt that that's an important facet of operating a coal mine, right?
Reserve data, yes.
Okay. And the fact is that management received timely reports on the composition of coal within the mine, right?
The management of Fremont, yes.
And the management duly reported those results to the board of Fremont, right?